In 1804, the United States embarked on a journey that would not only provide knowledge about a vast unknown territory, but also lay the groundwork for its westward expansion. This was the Corps of Discovery Expedition, a monumental expedition launched by President Thomas Jefferson, with the goal of exploring uncharted lands west of the Mississippi River. Tasked with uncovering the mysteries of a vast Louisiana Territory, the expedition's leaders, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, would face extreme conditions, document an array of unknown species, establish connections with over 50 native tribes, and pave the way for America's expansion across the continent. Welcome back, listeners, to Beneath the Shadows, the podcast where we journey through history's mysteries, explore untold stories, and uncover incredible tales that have shaped the world. I'm your host, Travis Fenn, and today we're setting off on one of the greatest adventures in American history. This daring journey across uncharted territories in the early 1800s changed the way we understood the American West, from discovering breathtaking landscapes to encountering unique native cultures. But before we get started, let's quickly go over some updates. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. That is Beneath the Shadows Podcast on both of those for weekly content, behind-the-scenes looks, and much more. Trying to get more active on there. Been posting once a week for episode updates, but that's it so far. And don't forget to check out the Patreon page. That's just Beneath the Shadows on Patreon there. You'll find exclusive bonus episodes, some available for free to start. Going to be doing free episodes until the new year. After the new year, it's only $3 a month. $3 a month for episodes coming out bi-weekly, so 2 additional episodes every month for just $3. Appreciate anyone who has even checked that out so far, so thank you very much. Thank you so much for tuning in. Whether you're a returning listener or here for the very first time, I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much. Now, let's set our sights westward and delve into the journey that redefined exploration and discovery. It's time to pull the Lewis and Clark expedition out of the shadows. The journey began with President Thomas Jefferson, a man of enlightenment who was deeply interested in science, nature, and westward exploration. In 1803, Jefferson secured the Louisiana Purchase from France, the sale of 828,000 square miles of French territory for $27 million. Acquiring an enormous expanse of territory that size nearly doubled the size of the young nation. Although thrilled, Jefferson knew the land was a mystery, filled with unknown geography, animals, plants, and indigenous tribes. Jefferson's ambition was to find a passage to the Pacific Ocean, the Northwest Passage. Most importantly, a waterway to expand trade opportunities and ensure the United States' control of the region. Jefferson turned to Meriwether Lewis, his private secretary and a captain in the U.S. Army, who was known for his intelligence, curiosity, and resilience. Lewis was dispatched to Philadelphia for instruction in botany, celestial navigation, medicine, and zoology. He also purchased supplies and spent $20 on a Newfoundland dog, Seaman, however you want to say it, Seaman, Seaman, whatever. Lewis procured weapons at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, now located in West Virginia. He supervised the construction of a 55-foot keelboat and secured smaller vessels in addition to designing an iron-framed boat that could be assembled on the journey. Lewis, in turn, recruited William Clark, an experienced frontiersman and former Army officer with whom he had a deep bond. Clark had been his military superior during the government's battles with the Northwest Indian Federation in the early 1790s. The U.S. Secretary of War denied Lewis's request of a shared command, but Captain Lewis and Lieutenant Clark chose to address one another as captain to hide this fact from the other members of the expedition. The two shared leadership responsibilities for the Corps, with Clark focusing on mapping and navigation, while Lewis took on the scientific aspects. Preparing for the journey required extensive planning. The Corps assembled at Camp Dubois, The Corps assembled at Camp Dubois near St. Louis in the winter of 1803. Supplies included weapons, food, trade goods for native tribes, and scientific instruments. They even brought a collapsible boat designed for use in shallow waters, although it would later prove impractical. The U.S. Mint even prepared special silver medals with a portrait of Jefferson and inscribed with a message of friendship and peace, called Indian Peace Medals. The soldiers were to distribute these medals to the tribes that they met. Among these was an Austrian-made 46 caliber Girandoni air rifle. Girandoni. Girandoni? A repeating rifle with a 20-round tubular magazine that was powerful enough to kill a deer. The expedition was prepared with flintlock firearms, knives, blacksmithing supplies, and cartography equipment. They also carried flags, gift bundles, medicine, and other items that they would need for their journey. Their team, known as the Corps of Discovery, consisted of nearly 45 men, including soldiers, hunters, Lewis's dog, and eventually a French interpreter named Toussaint Charbonneau, and his Shoshone wife, Sacagawea, which, may have heard of before, who would play a critical role later on. The team also included York, Clark's enslaved African-American servant, whose presence fascinated many of the native tribes they would meet. The first day of the Lewis and Clark expedition marked the beginning of an ambitious journey that would lead them deep into uncharted territory. On the morning of May 14, 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark rose early, filled with excitement and anticipation. Their base at Camp Dubois, just across the Mississippi River from St. Louis, in what is now Illinois, was bustling with activity. The team had spent the winter preparing for this day, gathering supplies, training, and readying themselves for the formidable journey to the Pacific and back. As the sun began to rise, the men of the Corps of Discovery made final preparations for their departure. William Clark led the early efforts, inspecting the boats and gear to ensure that everything was securely packed and in working order. Clark had a reputation for being meticulous, and he left no detail unchecked. Lewis, meanwhile, made sure all necessary documentation and scientific instruments were accounted for, including the journals in which he would record their findings. The Corps' vessels included a 55-foot keelboat, as I had stated before, equipped with a mast, sails, and oars, and two smaller pirogues, or pirogues, I'm not sure how you say it exactly, pirogues, which were open, flat-bottom boats ideal for the shallower sections of the river. Each vessel was loaded with essential supplies, barrels of flour, pork, cornmeal, salt, medical supplies, gunpowder, weapons, and trade goods such as beads, mirrors, and cloth. The keelboat also carried specialized scientific equipment, including a sextant, chronometer, and compasses. All told, the supplies weighed thousands of pounds, reflecting the sheer scale of the expedition's ambition. With everything prepared, Clark mustered the men. The Corps numbered nearly 45 men, including soldiers, interpreters, and Clark's enslaved servant York, who would be a valuable asset in encounters with Native American tribes. As the men gathered near the boats, Clark briefed them on the day's plans and reiterated the importance of discipline, resilience, and teamwork. For many of the men, this would be the last time they would see civilization for years, and a sense of excitement mixed with apprehension hung in the air. Among the men were the two primary leaders, Captain Meriwether Lewis, the introspective naturalist and scientist, and William Clark, the practical and experienced frontiersman. Their partnership, built on trust and mutual respect, would be the backbone of the expedition. Around 4 p.m., the Corps officially launched from Camp Dubois, pushing off into the swift waters of the Missouri River. It was a clear day, the river's current strong and unforgiving. The Missouri was unlike the Mississippi. It is known for its rapid twists and turns, strong currents, sandbars, and ever-shifting channels, making it difficult to navigate even in ideal conditions. As the keelboat and pirogues, I'm going to call them pirogues, it's probably wrong, but as the keelboat and pirogues pulled away from the shore, the men took up their oars, rowing in unison to keep a steady pace. Despite the river's force, the men worked hard to establish a rhythm. They quickly learned that navigating upriver against the Missouri's powerful current would be an immense physical challenge. The boats moved at about 2 miles an hour, slower than they had hoped, but progress was steady and spirits remained high. Even on the first day, Lewis and Clark emphasized establishing a routine. The Corps of Discovery operated as a military unit, meaning discipline and structure were paramount. Each man had specific tasks. Some were assigned to row and steer, while others worked as scouts, hunting for game, or scouting the riverbank for suitable campsites. The crew was also responsible for logging the day's events and taking notes on the river's conditions, any notable wildlife sightings, and their terrain that they passed. Each night, Lewis and Clark would record their observations in detailed journals, noting everything from the day's weather to the flora and fauna they encountered. These logs would serve not only as a record of their journey, but also as valuable scientific and geographic data for President Thomas Jefferson and future explorers. Let's dive into one of those journal entries right now. There's a great website out there, a couple of them actually. There's one that is the Lewis and Clark journals, and it's by date, all organized. Every single day that you could find, you could read into exactly what happened. The language, the spelling, the grammar is a little crazy. Like, there was an article I was reading that for Sioux, the Sioux Indians, the Sioux Native Americans, they actually ended up using, I think it was 22 different spellings for Sioux throughout their entire journey between Lewis and Clark, which is wild to me. So there'll be a couple of these journal entries throughout the show, but we're going to start with this one here. William Clark, Monday, May 14th, 1804. So the day that they took off. Rained the forepart of the day. I determined to go as far as St. Charles, a French village 7 leagues up the Missouri, and wait at that place until Captain Lewis could finish the business in which he was obligated to attend to at St. Louis, and join me by land from the place 24 miles. By this movement, I calculated that if any alterations in the loading of the vessels or other changes necessary, that they might be made at St. Charles. I set out at 4:00 p.m. in the presence of many neighboring inhabitants and proceeded under a gentle breeze up the Missouri to the upper point of the first island, 4 miles, and camped on the island, which is situated close on the right or starboard side, and opposite the mouth of a small creek called Coldwater. A heavy rain this afternoon. The course of this day nearly west, wind from northeast. And yeah, sorry if there's any like crazy me kind of wording it weird or whatever. I'm just trying to read exactly what they put. I didn't change any of the spelling. I didn't change any of the way that they wrote it, so it's a little wonky in some areas, and the spelling can be kind of hard to read for some of the words. So if I pause or fuck up, that's why. So yeah, that was the first day of the journey. A little rain, but they got 4 miles up and camped on an island close to a small creek called Coldwater. And they were going nearly west all day, wind from the northeast. So interesting, right? More detailed journeys and journal entries coming up here for some of the rest of the show. But the Missouri River proved formidable from the start. The men had to use a technique called poling to combat the strong current, where they pushed against the riverbed with long poles to propel the boats forward. In certain areas, the banks were too narrow to row effectively, so they used ropes to tow the boats by hand, a method that required them to wade through the river's muddy waters, sinking up to their knees in thick silt. The men had prepared for such challenges, but their first encounter with the Missouri's currents was a stark reminder of the grueling physical labor the expedition would demand. Despite the harsh conditions, the team's morale remained high, buoyed by a sense of duty and excitement at the promise of the unknown. As they made their way upstream, the men saw signs of abundant wildlife along the riverbanks. Deer, turkeys, and birds were plentiful, and the men marveled at the vastness and wildness of the land. Captain Lewis, who had been trained in botany and zoology, took a special interest in these observations, making note of the types of plants and animals they encountered. He noted that they had entered a land of plenty, a place full of game and untouched by European agriculture. Although they had little time to hunt the first day, the sight of game reassured the men that they could rely on the land to sustain them. In the coming weeks, hunting and foraging would become essential parts of their daily routine. As dusk approached, Clark began scouting the riverbank for a suitable place to camp. They chose a clearing on the north side of the river, pulling the boats ashore and unloading only the essential supplies they needed for the night. Setting up camp was a well-practiced routine, with some men tasked with gathering firewood and preparing a basic meal, while others set up tents and took stock of supplies. Lewis and Clark gathered the men and discussed the importance of vigilance, reminding them of the need to keep watches during the night. Although they were still close to familiar territory, this was the frontier, and they were acutely aware of potential dangers from wildlife or unexpected encounters with native tribes. Each man took turns standing guard, watching over the camp as the rest of the team settled down to rest after a long day. That night, around a campfire, Lewis and Clark reflected on the day. Lewis jotted down his thoughts in his journal, noting the challenges posed by the river and the resilience of the men. He expressed his hope that they would succeed in finding a route to the Pacific and expand the knowledge of the newly acquired Louisiana Territory. Clark's entry focused on navigational challenges and recorded his observations of the Missouri River's unpredictable current. He also sketched a rough outline of their route and marked their progress, which they would later transfer to more detailed maps. The first day had been exhausting, but both men were confident in the strength and determination of their team. This first day, though filled with difficulties, set the tone for the months to come. It was a day of trial, teamwork, and anticipation. The first step in a journey that would take them into the heart of the American wilderness, and ultimately to the Pacific Ocean. Moving forward, the group would average closer to 15 to 20 miles on average per day. As they moved through Missouri, up the Missouri River, the men started seeing an abundance of wildlife, as I had mentioned. The Corps faced extreme weather, including thunderstorms and high winds, which regularly delayed their travel. On June 26, the first disciplinary issues arose within the members of the Corps. Moses Reed was reprimanded for attempting to desert and was eventually brought back and punished. This established a strict code of discipline Lewis and Clark will maintain throughout the journey. That punishment would include lashings. The Corps reached the mouth of the Platte River, and Lewis and Clark took time to explore the surrounding area, noting the region's rich biodiversity. Jefferson had also instructed Lewis and Clark to establish peaceful relations with the native tribes. On July 11th, the Corps encountered its first Native American group, the Oto, with whom they conducted a council, attempting to establish friendly relations and explain the peace and trade mission of the United States. They presented them with peace medals and gifts and gave speeches about friendship and trade with the United States. Although these initial meetings went well, they were only the beginning of what would prove to be a delicate task of diplomacy. The Corps then pressed onward through the Nebraska Territory, facing intense heat and the constant challenge of navigating the river's shifting sandbars. On August 20th, Sergeant Charles Floyd died, likely of appendicitis, becoming the only fatality of the expedition. He is buried at Floyd's Bluff, named after him, a hilled area in southern Sioux City, Iowa, and the loss affected the morale of the Corps. Just a few days later, on August 30th, they held a tense council with the Yankton Sioux, emphasizing peaceful relations while showcasing their weapons as a warning. Lewis and Clark's leadership and diplomatic skills proved crucial in diffusing potential conflicts with local tribes, time and time again. Within the next month, the Corps continued through Iowa and into present-day South Dakota, marveling at the Great Plains and its vast herds of bison. On September 25th, as they moved up the river, they encountered the powerful Teton Sioux, or the Lakota as they were known, who dominated the region and were wary of outsiders. The Teton Sioux chief, Black Buffalo, demanded a toll for safe passage. Tensions ran high, with the Sioux surrounding the Corps and preparing for potential conflict. Black Buffalo persuaded Lewis to distribute more tobacco to the assembled warriors. Lewis complied, and the expedition was allowed to continue upstream to the Arikara villages. Lewis was deeply interested in the natural environment and meticulously recorded plant and animal species unknown to American science. Along the river, he observed American bison, pronghorn antelope, and coyotes, animals foreign to those in the East. His notes, along with Clark's maps, would become some of the first and most accurate records of the flora, fauna, and landscapes of the American West. Lewis, September 14, 1804. Shields kill the hare of the prairie, weighing 6 pounds and a quarter. The eye is large and prominent. The sight is circular, deep sea green and occupies 1/3 of the width of the eye. The remaining 2/3 is a ring of a bright yellowish silver color. The ears are placed in the upper part of the head and very near to each other. The ears are very flexible. The animal moves them with great ease and quickness and can fold them on his back or delete them at pleasure. The front outer fold of the ear is a reddish-brown. The inner folds of those which lie together when the ears are thrown back and which occupy 2/3 of the width of the ear is a clear white color except 1 inch at the tip of the ear, which is black. The lower fold is of a light gray. The head, back, shoulders, and outer part of the thighs are a lead-colored gray. The sides, as they approach the belly, grow lighter, becoming gradually more white. The belly and breast are white with a shad of lead color. The fur is long and fine. The tail is white, round, and bluntly pointed. The fur on it is long and extremely fine and soft. When it runs, it carries its tail straight behind the direction of its body. The body is much smaller and more length than the rabbit in proportion to its height. The teeth are like those of the hare or rabbit, as its upper lip split. Its food is grass or herbs. It resorts to open plains, is extremely fleet, and never burrows or takes shelter in the ground when pursued. I measured the leaps of one, which I surprised in the plains on the 17th, and found them 21 feet. The ground was a little descending. They appeared to run with more ease, and to bound with greater agility than any animal I ever saw. They are extremely fleet. This animal is usually single, seldom associating in any considerable numbers. As winter approached, the Corps reached the Mandan and Hidatsa villages near present-day Bismarck, North Dakota. These communities were hubs of trade among indigenous tribes and European fur traders, providing the Corps with a welcome respite. They decided to establish Fort Mandan nearby, where they would spend their winter months. The Mandan and Hidatsa tribes proved invaluable allies, sharing food, stories, and information about the terrain ahead. They explained routes, described various tribes further west, and taught the Corps how to survive the cold winter. Their advice was essential for the Corps, which endured temperatures dropping to 40 degrees below zero. Also during this time, on Sunday, November 4th, the Corps would meet Toussaint Charbonneau and his Shoshone wife, Sacagawea. Recognizing her value as both an interpreter and guide, Lewis and Clark invited them to join the expedition. Sacagawea, who was pregnant, would give birth to a son, John Baptiste, or Pomp, whom she would carry with her throughout the journey. Her presence was not only practical, but symbolically significant, as it signaled to the tribes they encountered that the Corps did not pose a threat. Clark, 4th of November. A Frenchman by name Charbonneau, who speaks the Big Belly language, visit us. He wished to hire and informed us his 2 squaws were Snake Indians. We engage him to go on with us and take one of his wives to interpret the Snake language. The Indians' horses and dogs live in the same lodge with themselves. So they're talking about, this is Clark talking about meeting Charbonneau, Toussaint Charbonneau, I think it's how you say it. I didn't actually look it up, and then encouraging him to come with them and bring one of his wives, which would be Sacagawea, to come with them to help them interpret the Snake language and deal with some of the other native tribes to come. Continuing in November, the Corps began construction on Fort Mandan, where they would spend the winter. Fort Mandan is located just north of Bismarck. They would build sturdy cabins and prepare for the frigid North Dakota winter while Sacagawea settled into the group. Rolling into December, the men struggled with sub-zero temperatures, but the Mandan natives provided corn and other provisions to help sustain them. This period allowed them to repair equipment, make clothing, and strategize for the westward leg of their journey after the winter faded. The winter at Fort Mandan proved to be long and challenging, with temperatures often dropping to 10 degrees Fahrenheit and below, and average highs being only in the 20s. The months pushed on, and the men focused on preparing their gear and recording observations of the land, animals, and the customs of the Mandan and Hidatsa. A separate, beautiful occurrence would happen during this winter also. On February 11th, 1805, Sacagawea gave birth to her son, John Baptiste Charbonneau, who will accompany her and the Corps for the remainder of the journey. The crew resumed. I can't even imagine, though, giving birth and then taking this child immediately across the country, having to carry him everywhere because he's so small, so he's just a little lad. The crew resumed rigorous training in preparation for their pending departure, come spring, honing their skills and braving the harsh winter. Winter allowed Lewis to document numerous animals and plants surrounding the Mandan villages. The journals described prairie dogs, wolves, and various bird species. These observations were essential to George Jefferson. Jesus. I just mixed George Washington and Thomas Jefferson for some reason. But also, reminds me of the show, The Jeffersons, and the main character, I believe it's the dad, George Jefferson. Hilarious.
Well, we're moving on up to the east side.
These observations were essential to Jefferson, who saw the expedition as a mission of scientific discovery as much as a territorial expansion. Clark, Fort Mandan, 7th of January, Monday, 1805. A very cold, clear day. The thermometer stood at 22 degrees below zero with the wind northwest. The river fell 1 inch. Several Indians returned from hunting. One of them, the big white chef of the lower Mandan village, dined with us and gave me a sketch of the country as far as the high mountains. And on the south side of the river Rejoin, he says that the river Rejoin receives 6 small rivers on the south side, and that the country is very hilly, and the greater part covered with timber and great numbers of beaver. The 3 men returned from hunting. They killed 4 deer and 2 wolves, saw buffalo a long ways off. I continued to draw a connected plot from the information of traders, Indians, and my own observations and ideas. From the best information, the Great Falls is about 800 miles nearly west. Following the staggering winter, the Corps would continue west. On April 7, 1805, the Corps departed from Fort Mandan with 33 men, Sacagawea, her newborn son, and Toussaint Charbonneau. A separate detachment with reports, journals, and scientific specimens returned to St. Louis to update President Jefferson on their progress. That would get back, I believe in August is when that separate detachment would actually reach Jefferson. The Missouri River rose, becoming narrower and faster, and Sacagawea's familiarity with the area proved increasingly beneficial. They ventured into the Great Plains, where Lewis encountered the bison herds that roamed in the thousands. Here, the landscape changed, and the expedition faced new challenges, from finding food to adapting to the shifting terrain. As they entered what is now Montana, the men faced new challenges from the terrain and encountered grizzly bears for the first time. They were taken aback by the grizzlies' size, power, and aggression, noting in their journals just how dangerous these encounters became. The Corps marvels at the sight of pronghorn antelope, bighorn sheep, and other unique species, meticulously documenting these encounters for President Jefferson. June would provide a great challenge when the Corps reached the Great Falls of the Missouri. Contrary to the expectations of a single waterfall, they found a chain of 5 waterfalls. The Black Eagle Falls, Coulter Falls, Rainbow Falls, Crooked Falls, and Big Falls, extending over 18 miles. This required a grueling, month-long portage during which they hauled their boats and supplies overland across rough, rocky terrain. They crafted makeshift carts and pushed on, all the while enduring intense heat, rattlesnake encounters, and the occasional flash flood. During this portage, Sacagawea fell gravely ill, but Lewis, who had medical training, administered herbal remedies that likely saved her life. Her eventual recovery was a relief for the Corps, who had come to rely on her as a guide and intermediary. The Corps reached the 3 forks of the Missouri River, naming them Jefferson, Madison, and Gallatin Rivers, after Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Albert Gallatin. After some debate, they chose to follow the Jefferson River, with Sacagawea recognizing certain landmarks that confirmed they were approaching Shoshone territory. By August, the Corps reached the source of the Missouri River, where the waters slowed to a trickle at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. They knew they had reached a critical stage. Ahead lay the mountains, a nearly impassable barrier, and without horses, they had little chance of crossing them. On August 13th, 1805, the Corps would encounter the Shoshone and learned that their leader, Chief Kamawat, and learned that Chief Kamawat was Sacagawea's brother. This reunion greatly assisted in gaining trust of the Shoshone and helped them secure horses to cross the Rockies. Chief Kamawat and the Shoshone warned them of the difficulties of the mountains. They learned that the journey would be perilous, with steep, rocky paths and bitterly cold nights. The Shoshone provided them with supplies that they could spare, along with advice on surviving the brutal mountain conditions. With horses and guidance from the Shoshone, the Corps was determined to press on. Crossing the Bitterroot Mountains proved to be the most treacherous leg of the journey. They endured starvation, freezing temperatures, and extreme exhaustion. Reduced to eating horses and whatever edible plants they could find, the Corps pushed on. The journey was brutal, but they eventually descended into the Clearwater River Valley, where they were met by the Nez Perce tribe. The Nez Perce tribe eventually helped the Corps with food and guidance. The Nez Perce, known for their skill in diplomacy, provided food and helped the Corps regain their strength. They taught the Corps how to make canoes from logs, a technique that would allow them to continue downriver with greater speed. This kindness and guidance was crucial for the journey ahead, as they would soon face the rapids of the Columbia River. With renewed strength, the Corps embarked on the final leg of their westward journey, navigating the treacherous waters of the Clearwater River, which led them to the Snake River and eventually to the broad, fast-flowing Columbia River. This river marked the last major waterway they would have to follow to reach the Pacific Ocean, but it came with its own challenges. The Columbia presented dangerous rapids and steep, narrow gorges. The Corps had to carefully maneuver their dugout canoes through the powerful current and rocky passages, enduring cold rains and constant dampness that soaked them to the bone. Near a particularly treacherous section known as the Dalles Rapids, they decided to portage, hauling their heavy canoes and supplies overland to avoid capsizing in the rough waters. The further downriver they traveled, the more they encountered evidence of a rich trade network among native tribes in the area. Many of these tribes, including the Chinook and the Clatsop, traded extensively with coastal groups, using canoes and trading routes that connected them to distant tribes. The Corps noted with fascination the elaborate Chinook trading canoes and the diversity of goods available in these communities, including European items like brass kettles and glass beads. Finally, on November 7th, 1805, after nearly a year and a half of travel, Clark recorded in his journal, "Ocean in view! Oh, the joy!" This iconic entry marked the Corps' first sight of the Pacific Ocean. However, they still had a ways to go before they actually reached the coast. Rain and strong tides delayed them for several days as they navigated down the last miles of the Columbia River, finally arriving at the shore late in November. After reaching the Pacific, the Corps faced challenges of finding a suitable location to camp for the winter. They established Fort Clatsop near present-day Astoria, Oregon, in December 1805, naming it after the Clatsop tribe who lived nearby. Fort Clatsop was a small, rudimentary shelter that barely provided respite from the cold and damp conditions of the Pacific Northwest. Winter at Fort Clatsop, I always want to say Clatstop for whatever reason, but winter at Fort Clatsop was a test of endurance and morale. The Corps endured nearly constant rain, which made the fort damp and uncomfortable, and hunting proved difficult in the thick forest. They spent most of the winter trading with the Clatsop and Chinook tribes for food, especially dried fish and Wapato roots, W-A-P-A-T-O, roots, a staple in the native diet. The Chinook introduced them to salmon fishing techniques and shared their impressive knowledge of local marine life. During this time, Lewis continued his scientific documentation, describing coastal wildlife and plant species. He was particularly intrigued by the sea otters in the region, noting the value of their pelts in trade. Clark also updated his maps, drawing from the information provided by local tribes to create one of the most accurate early maps of the region. The Clatsop and Chinook, though willing to trade, were wary of the Corps and shrewd in their dealings. Unlike some of the inland tribes who had little experience with Europeans, the coastal tribes had frequent contact with traders from Europe and were well aware of the value of their goods. This savvy made for tough negotiations. The Corps traded items like beads and cloth for food, though Clark recorded his frustration at what he saw as the high prices the native people demanded. Despite the damp conditions and limited provisions, the Corps managed to keep their spirits up. They prepared for the return journey, repairing their gear and making new clothes from elk hides. As spring approached, their focus shifted to getting home. On March 23, 1806, the Corps prepared to leave Fort Clatsop. See, I fucking did it, Clatsop, and begin their journey back to St. Louis. They were eager to return home, but they faced the same obstacles they had encountered in the westward journey. The Corps retraced their route up the Columbia River, paddling upstream against the current, a grueling task that demanded strength and endurance. As they moved back through tribal territories, tensions occasionally arose. Some native groups, seeing the Corps' dwindling supplies, attempted to seize their horses or trade goods. One incident involved the Walla Walla and Shoshone Bannock tribes, who were concerned that the Corps would deplete resources. However, through skilled diplomacy, Lewis and Clark managed to avoid any serious conflict, often relying on Sacagawea to help mediate. When the Corps reached the Nez Perce lands, they received a warm welcome from the tribe that had helped them survive the previous fall. The Nez Perce again provided food and horses, allowing the Corps to cross the Bitterroot Mountains. This crossing, though still challenging, was less harrowing than before, as they benefited from improved weather conditions and their growing familiarity with the landscape. To maximize their exploration of the territory, Lewis and Clark decided to divide into two groups for part of the return journey. Lewis led one of the groups northeast to explore the Marias River, while Clark took the other group along the Yellowstone River. This decision allowed them to map more territory and gather additional information about the landscape. Lewis, Thursday, July 3, 1806. All arrangements being now completed for carrying into effect the several schemes we had planned for execution on our return. We saddled our horses and set out. I took leave of my worthy friend and companion, Captain Clark, and the party that accompanied him. I could not avoid feeling much concern on this occasion, although I hoped the separation was only momentary. Lewis's group encountered hostility with the Blackfeet tribe, who were alarmed by the Corps' presence in their territory. In a tense confrontation, 2 young Blackfeet warriors were killed. This was the only direct violence encountered between the Corps and Native Americans during the entire expedition, underscoring the fragile relations within tribes whose lands were increasingly encroached upon. All right, now we got a long-ass journal entry coming up here from Lewis that documents the encounter that they had with the Blackfeet here. So we're going to dive into that right now, too, and really get some in-depth information on this encounter that they had, this violent encounter that ended up with 2 of the Blackfeet warriors being killed. Lewis, July 27th, 1806, Sunday. This morning at daylight, the Indians got up and crowded around the fire. Jay Fields, who was on post, had carelessly laid down his gun behind him near where his brother was sleeping. One of the Indians, the fellow to whom I had given the medal last evening, slipped behind him and took his gun, and that of his brother's, unperceived by him. At the same instant, 2 others advanced and seized the guns of Drewer and myself. Jay Fields, seeing this, turned about to look for his gun, and saw the fellow just running off with her and his brothers. He called to his brother, who instantly jumped up and pursued the Indian with him, whom they overtook at the distance of 50 or 60 paces from the camp. Seized their guns. Oh, seized. I think it's supposed to be seized. It says sized. Seized their guns, seized their guns, and wrested them from him, and R. Fields, as he seized his gun, stabbed the Indian to the heart with his knife. The fellow ran about 15 steps and fell dead. Of this, I did not know until afterwards, Having recovered their guns, they ran back instantly to camp. Drewer, who was awake, saw the Indian take hold of his gun and instantly jumped up and seized her and wrested her from him. But the Indian still retained his pouch. His jumping up and crying, "Damn you, let go my gun," awakened me. I jumped up and asked what was the matter, which I quickly learned when I saw Dreyer in a scuffle with the Indian for his gun. I reached to seize my gun, but found her gone. I then drew a pistol from my holster and, turning myself about, saw the Indian making off with my gun. I ran at him with my pistol and bid him lay down my gun. At this instant, it's in quotes, parentheses next to it, which he was in the act of doing when the Fields returned and drew up their guns to shoot him, which I forbid, as he did not appear to be about to make any resistance or commit any offensive act. He dropped the gun and walked slowly off. I picked her up instantly. Dreyer, having the time, recovered his gun and pouch, asked me if he might not kill the fellow, which I also forbid, as the Indian did not appear to wish to kill us. As soon as they found us all in possession of our arms, they ran and endeavored to drive off all our horses. I now hollowed to the men and told them to fire on them if they attempt to drive off our horses. They accordingly pursued the men, the main party, who were driving the horses upriver, and I pursued the man who had taken my gun, who was with another, driving off a part of the horses, which were left to the camp. I pursued them so closely that they could not take 12 of their own horses, but continued to drive one of mine with some others. At the distance of 300 paces, they entered one of the steep niches in the bluff, with the horses before them. Being nearly out of breath, I could pursue no further. I called to them, as I had done several times before, that I would shoot if they did not give me back my horse, and raised my gun. One of them jumped behind a rock and spoke to the other, who turned around and stopped at the distance of 30 steps from me, and I shot him right through the belly. He fell to his knees and on his right elbow, from which position he partly raised himself and fired at me, and turning himself about crawled in behind a rock, which was only a few feet from him. He overshot me. Being bareheaded, I felt the wind of his bullet very distinctly. Not having my shot pouch, I could not reload my piece, and as there were two of them behind good shelters from me, I did not think it prudent to rush on them with my pistol, which I had discharged, and I had no means of reloading until I reached camp. I therefore returned leisurely towards camp. On my way, I met with Drewer, who, having heard the report of the guns, had returned in search of me, and left the fields to pursue the Indians. I desired him to hasten to the camp with me and assist in catching as many of the Indian horses as necessary, and to call to the fields, if he could make them hear, to come back, that we still had a sufficient number of horses. This he did, but they were too far away to hear him. We reached the camp and began to catch the horses and saddle them and put on our packs. The reason I had not my pouch with me was that I had not time to return about 50 yards to camp after getting my gun before I was obliged to pursue the Indians or suffer them to collect and drive off all the horses. We had caught and saddled the horses and began to arrange the packs when the Fields returned with 4 of our horses. We left one of our horses and took 4 of the best of the Indians' horses. While the men were preparing the horses, I put 4 shields and 2 bows and quivers of arrows, which had been left on the fire, with sundry other articles. They all left their baggage at our mercy. They had but 2 guns, and one of them they left. The others were armed with bows and arrows and eye-dags. The gun we took with us. I also retook the flag, but left the medal about the neck of the dead man, that they might be informed who we were. We took some of the buffalo meat and set out, ascending the bluffs by the same route we had descended last evening, leaving the balance of 9 of their horses, which we did not want. The Fields told me that 3 of the Indians whom they pursued swam the river, one of them on my horse, and that 2 others ascended the hill and escaped from them with a part of their horses. 2 I had pursued into the niche. One lay dead near the camp. and the 8th we could not account for, but supposed that he ran off early in the contest. Having ascended the hill, we took our course through a beautiful level plain a little to the south of east. My design was to hasten to the entrance of Maria's River as quickly as possible, in the hope of meeting with the canoes and party at the place, having no doubt but that they would pursue us with a large party, and as there was a band near the Broken Mountains, or probably between them, and the mouth of the river, we expected them to receive intelligence from us and arrive at that place nearly as soon as we could. No time was there before to be lost, and we pushed our horses as hard as they would bear. At 8 miles, we passed a large branch 40 yards wide, which I called Battle River. At 3 p.m., we arrived at Rose River, about 5 miles above where we had passed it when we went out. Having traveled, by my estimate, compared with our former distances and causes, about 63 miles. Here we halted an hour and a half, took some refreshment, and suffered our horses to graze. They proved warm, but the late rains had supplied the little reservoirs in the plains with water and had put them in fine order for our travel. Our whole route so far was as level as a bowling green, with little stone and few prickly pears. After dinner, we pursued the bottoms of Rose River, but finding inconvenient to pass the river so often, we again ascended the hills on the southwest side and took to the open plains. By dark, we had traveled about 17 miles further. We now halted to rest ourselves and our horses about 2 hours. We killed a buffalo cow and took a small quantity of meat. After refreshing ourselves again, set out by the moonlight and traveled leisurely. Heavy thunderclouds lowered around us on every quarter, but that from which the moon gave us light. We continued to pass immense herds of buffalo all night, as we had done in the latter parts of the day. We traveled until 2 o'clock in the morning, having come, by my estimate, after dark about 20 miles. So yeah, MS is miles, it must be. We now turned out our horses and laid ourselves down to rest in the plain, very much fatigued, as may be readily conceived. My Indian horse carried me very well, in short, much better than my own would have done, and leaves me with little reason to complain of the robbery. So they just killed 2 people, and they ended up getting some shit out of it, and he's like, I can't complain, this horse is fucking great, doing better than mine would have. Clark's group, meanwhile, explored the Yellowstone and encountered large herds of bison in impressive rock formation, including Pompey's Pillar, which Clark named after Sacagawea's son, John Baptiste, which he nicknamed Pompey or Pomp. Clark carved his name into the rock, leaving one of the few physical remnants of the expedition. And yeah, you can actually look up a photo of this. I think it's still there today, as far as I know. Carved into the rock, it says something like William, and it has a date on it, or like W. Clark, and has a date on it. By the second week of August 1806, the 2 groups reunited near the Missouri River, thrilled to see each other after almost 2 months apart. They continued down the Missouri, with the river's currents carrying them swiftly back towards St. Louis. Spirits were high as they neared home, eager to share their discoveries and reunite with family and friends. Unfortunately, a mistake by Pierre Cruzat almost resulted in an unimaginable tragedy. On the morning of August 11th, 1806, Cruzat was hunting elk with the other men, including Lewis. After seeing a large group of elk, killing one and wounding another, the men set off in pursuit of the rest. Not shortly after, Lewis would line up a shot, and right before pulling the trigger, a musket ball would enter his left thigh, about an inch below his hip joint. Pierre Cruzat had mistaken Lewis for an elk and had shot him accidentally. While painful and not ideal in any way, Lewis and his crew continued on, reuniting with Clark and his men in the following days. Spirits lift as they follow the river south, recognizing landmarks and anticipating their return home. On September 23, 1806, after 2 years, 4 months, and over 8,000 miles, the Corps of Discovery arrived in St. Louis to a hero's welcome. News of their success spread rapidly, and they were celebrated for their bravery and accomplishments. Lewis and Clark brought back extensive journals, maps, and specimens, offering the first detailed descriptions of the West to the American public. The Lewis and Clark expedition left a profound legacy. Their journey provided America with its first comprehensive understanding of the lands west of the Mississippi, and their maps and records became essential for future travelers and settlers. Clark's maps were among the most accurate of the time, guiding countless pioneers and traders. The Corps documented over 300 new species of plants and animals, including the prairie dog, grizzly bear, and various cacti. Their records included detailed descriptions of the landscape, climate, and resources available in the Western Territories. This information was invaluable to scientists and naturalists back east, igniting interest in the American frontier. The expedition established initial diplomatic relationships with many native tribes, setting the stage for future American expansion into those territories. However, it also marked the beginning of significant changes for indigenous people, as the influx of settlers would lead to further displacement and conflict. The expedition embodied the spirit of exploration and the pursuit of knowledge, reflecting Jefferson's vision for a nation built on discovery and scientific progress. Lewis and Clark became iconic figures, and their journey has since been immortalized in American history as a symbol of the country's westward expansion and ambition. While the expedition opened up new opportunities for trade and settlement, it also had a profound impact on the Native American tribes whose lands would soon be claimed by the United States. The Corps of Discovery was celebrated for its accomplishments, but it also marked the beginning of a complex and often painful chapter in the history of westward expansion. The Lewis and Clark expedition was more than a journey of discovery. It was a defining moment in the American history. Through meticulous planning, diplomacy, and sheer perseverance, the Corps of Discovery unlocked the mysteries of the American West. Their legacy endures not only in the maps and scientific observations they left behind, but also in the spirit of exploration and adventure that has come to define the American story. The expedition also would have profound and prolonged effects on Lewis and Clark themselves. So the life after the expedition, things have now come to an end. What happened to Meriwether Lewis and William Clark after their journey ended in 1806? Let's start with Meriwether Lewis, who would face more tragedy after the expedition ended in 1806. Just over 3 years later, Lewis would pass away at the young age of 35. Meriwether Lewis, celebrated as one of the leaders of the legendary Lewis and Clark expedition, returned from his historic journey in September 1806 to a hero's welcome, as I had mentioned. However, his life after the expedition was marked by professional achievements, personal struggles, and an untimely death shrouded in mystery. Upon the Corps of Discovery's triumphant return to St. Louis, Lewis, along with William Clark, were hailed as national heroes. The expedition's success had far-reaching impacts, including new maps, scientific discoveries, and improved knowledge of Native American tribes. Lewis's role as a leader and scientist earned him great acclaim. President Thomas Jefferson, Lewis's mentor and close friend, commended him for his meticulous documentation and leadership. Jefferson declared the expedition the greatest geographical discovery ever made. Congress rewarded Lewis with 1,600 acres of land and double pay for his service, a significant amount at this time. In 1807, President Jefferson appointed Lewis as the governor of the Upper Louisiana Territory, a vast and newly acquired region that included parts of today's Midwest and Great Plains. As governor, Lewis was tasked with implementing Jefferson's vision for westward expansion. His duties included managing relations with Native American tribes, encouraging settlement, and enforcing laws across a sprawling and diverse territory. Lewis settled in St. Louis, which served as the administrative hub of the territory. However, despite his qualifications, Lewis struggled in his new role. The administrative challenges of governing such a vast and often lawless region took a toll on him. Delays in funding from the federal government hindered his ability to implement his policies effectively. Lewis's tenure as governor was fraught with difficulties, including political disputes and allegations of mismanagement. Lewis's political allies, including Jefferson, left office shortly after his appointment. His successor, President James Madison, was less supportive, leaving Lewis vulnerable to criticism and lacking resources. The delayed reimbursement for expenses incurred during the expedition left Lewis in significant debt. He faced scrutiny over his financial management and struggled to defend himself against accusations of impropriety. By 1809, Lewis's mental and physical health had noticeably deteriorated. Historians speculate that he may have suffered from depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, from the hardships of the expedition, or even a neurological condition such as syphilis or mercury poisoning, a common treatment at that time. So they would take these mercury pills when something was wrong on the trail, thinking it would help cure them or cure their sicknesses or illnesses. And syphilis is from having sex with a lot of the native women. The native women prior had gotten syphilis from European travelers in the area. So they were often rewarded with sex by some of the tribes. The men of the tribes thought that they would receive or would bring in some kind of good energy by offering up their females for sex. It's a very interesting part of the story, and even William Clark's enslaved man, York, would have sex with some of these native women. So definitely a very interesting part of the story that I did not touch on at all, but he also began to drink heavily, which exacerbated his struggles. Lewis's once close friendship with William Clark became strained, as Lewis withdrew and focused on his governance challenges. Lewis had promised Jefferson to organize and publish the journals of the expedition. However, his deteriorating mental state and administrative duties left the task incomplete, further adding to his feelings of failure. In late 1809, Lewis embarked on a journey to Washington, D.C. to defend himself against allegations of financial mismanagement and to seek reimbursement for his expenses. He traveled along the Natchez Trace, a remote trail in the frontier wilderness, heading towards the nation's capital. On October 10, 1809, Lewis stopped at Grinder's Stand, a roadside inn in Tennessee. There, tragedy would strike. Meriwether Lewis died on October 11, 1809, under mysterious circumstances at the young age of 35. According to historical accounts, including testimony from the innkeeper's wife, Lewis reportedly shot himself in the chest and head in an apparent suicide. His declining mental health and mounting pressures lend credibility to this theory, but some historians and contemporaries believe Lewis was murdered. They cite inconsistencies in eyewitness accounts and suggest he may have been killed by robbers or even enemies seeking revenge for his policies as governor. Despite the tragic end to his life, Lewis's contributions to American history remain monumental. The maps, scientific data, and cultural insights he helped gather during the Lewis and Clark expedition laid the groundwork for westward expansion and exploration. In 1848, Lewis's legacy was cemented with the creation of the Meriwether Lewis Monument near his burial site along the Natchez Trace. The monument commemorates his role in shaping America's understanding of its western territories. Meriwether Lewis's life was a story of immense achievement and profound struggle. He was a man of intellect and determination whose contributions to exploration and science reshaped the course of American history. Yet, his personal struggles remind us all of the toll such an extraordinary endeavor can take on even the most celebrated individuals. And now, let's take a big look at the quite a bit longer post-expedition life of William Clark. William Clark, co-leader of the Corps of Discovery, emerged from the Lewis and Clark expedition as a national hero. Unlike his counterpart, Meriwether Lewis, Clark's life after the expedition was marked by stability, professional accomplishments, and a legacy of service. From his role as a public servant to his family, Clark remained a prominent figure in the young American Republic until his death in 1838. After the expedition concluded in September 1806, Clark and Meriwether Lewis were greeted as heroes in St. Louis. The journey had opened up vast new territories and provided valuable insights into the land, people, and resources of the Louisiana Purchase. Congress rewarded Clark, as they did with Lewis, with 1,600 acres of land and back pay for his service. Although his financial compensation was less than Lewis's, since Clark had technically held the rank of lieutenant during the expedition. Despite the discrepancy in rank, Clark's contributions to the expedition were widely celebrated, and he was acknowledged as an equal partner in its success. Shortly after the expedition, Clark turned his attention to personal matters. In 1808, he married Julia Hancock, a woman whose family he had known in Virginia. The couple had 5 children, the first of whom in 1809, January or February, and was named Meriwether Lewis Clark, in honor of his close friend and expedition partner. After Julia's death in 1820, Clark remarried Julia's cousin, Harriet Kennerly Radford, with whom he had 3 more children. Clark was known as a devoted father and raised a large family, ensuring that his children received good education and opportunities. In 1807, Clark was appointed by Thomas Jefferson to serve as the Brigadier General of the Militia and Superintendent of Indian Affairs for the Louisiana Territory. Clark's role as Superintendent of Indian Affairs would define much of his post-expedition career. Clark worked to mediate conflicts between Native American tribes and settlers, negotiate treaties, and oversee trade and relations between the U.S. government and various tribes. While Clark showed respect for Native American cultures and was regarded as a fair negotiator by many tribes, his work also facilitated the federal government's policy of westward expansion, which often displaced indigenous peoples. Clark played a critical role in numerous treaty negotiations, such as the Treaty of St. Louis in 1816, which ceded significant native lands to the United States. Clark continued to serve as Brigadier General in the Missouri Militia, though he rarely saw combat. His military rank added to his stature in the burgeoning Missouri Territory. Clark made St. Louis his permanent home, where he became a prominent figure in the growing city. Clark was well respected in the St. Louis society, hosting prominent officials, explorers, and Native American leaders. He mentored and encouraged future explorers such as Zebulon Pike and Stephen Harriman Long, fostering continued exploration of the western frontier. After the expedition, Clark maintained a close friendship with Meriwether Lewis, but their relationship became strained during Lewis's troubled tenure as governor of Upper Louisiana. Clark tried to assist Lewis with his financial and personal struggles, even offering to travel with him to Washington, D.C. in 1809. However, Lewis insisted on traveling alone, a decision that ended tragically with Lewis's death. Clark was devastated by Lewis's passing. He played a significant role in preserving Lewis's legacy, advocating for recognition of their shared accomplishments. During the War of 1812, Clark's responsibilities expanded as tensions rose further on the frontier. Clark worked to fortify the Missouri frontier against British-backed Native American forces, though he did not personally lead troops into any major battles. Following the war, Clark's diplomatic work with Native tribes became even more critical as the U.S. pushed further westward. Clark's later years were marked by continued public service and a growing family. By the 1830s, Clark's health began to decline. He gradually reduced his workload, but remained a respected elder statesman in Missouri. Clark died on September 1, 1838, at the age of 68 in St. Louis. He was buried in the Bellefontaine Cemetery, where his grave remains a site of homage to this day. Clark's contributions to American history endure through his leadership in the Corps of Discovery and his decades of service. Clark played an instrumental role in ensuring the publication and preservation of the expedition journals, which remain invaluable historical documents. His detailed maps of the expedition became critical tools for settlers and explorers in the decades to follow. Despite his role in the displacement of native tribes, Clark is remembered as a figure who often sought peaceful solutions and approached his diplomatic work with respect for indigenous peoples. William Clark's post-expedition life was a testament to his resilience and dedication to public service. From his work in Indian affairs to his influence on the westward expansion of the United States, Clark left an indelible mark on American history. While his journey with Lewis defined his early career, his leadership and legacy extended far beyond the Corps of Discovery, shaping the trajectory of a nation. All right, okay. Wow. So much information on this one. So much information. And I even, I had to skip out on some. I knew this episode was going to be pushing quite a lengthy bit, and I didn't want to include everything or go into detail as much as I could with everything, even though, I really could have. I know this episode's already coming out late because I started recording late on it, and since it's such a long episode, I've had to split it up. So I appreciate you guys being here and listening through this whole thing, because I know it's a lengthy one, but it's packed with information. It's super interesting, and it's kind of absurd in some ways. So much information packed into this one. Let's gather and condense some of that major information, and let's learn a new piece of information or two as well with today's main marks. Number 1. In 1803, Jefferson secured the Louisiana Purchase from France, the sale of 828,000 square miles of French territory for $27 million. Acquiring an enormous expanse of territory that size nearly doubled the size of the young nation. Although thrilled, Jefferson knew the land was a mystery, filled with unknown geography, animals, plants, and indigenous tribes. Jefferson's ambition was to find a passage to the Pacific Ocean, most importantly, a waterway, to expand trade opportunities and ensure the United States' control of the region. Number 2. Jefferson turned to Meriwether Lewis, his private secretary and a captain in the U.S. Army, who was known for his intelligence, curiosity, and resilience. Lewis, in turn, recruited William Clark, an experienced frontiersman and former Army officer with whom he had a deep bond. Number 3. On the morning of May 14, 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark rose early, filled with excitement and anticipation. Their base at Camp Dubois, just across the Mississippi River from St. Louis, in what is now Illinois, was bustling with activity. The team had spent the winter preparing for this day, gathering supplies, training, and readying themselves for the formidable journey to the Pacific and back. Around 4 p.m., the Corps officially launched from Camp Dubois, pushing off into the swift waters of the Missouri River. Number 4. The expedition would last 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days, ending on September 23, 1806, with the Corps' arrival back in St. Louis. The expedition discovered and cataloged over 178 new plant species and 122 new animal species, significantly expanding scientific knowledge of the American West. Number 5. The expedition members were known to have a hearty appetite, consuming a variety of foods, including dog, buffalo, and squirrel meat, also horse meat, though Seaman, a Newfoundland dog, Lewis's dog, who was a beloved member of the expedition, was spared. He helped with hunting, provided companionship, and even served as a sentry. Yeah, from what I was reading, most of the dog that they ate, and some of the men preferred dog over things like salmon, which is crazy to me, but most of the dog that the members of the group would eat was from Native American tribes. They would trade and get dog meat from these tribes. Number 6. William Clark was kind of a dick, though his actions were common occurrences during his time. Clark was referred to as a habitually cruel enslaver. He repeatedly refused requests from York to live in Louisville with his family, York being the enslaved man that Clark brought on the expedition with him. Clark regularly whipped the people he enslaved, bragging about it in letters to his brother. He eventually freed York, but also owned slaves until his death, leaving some enslaved persons to his children in his will. All right, okay. Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, both passed on now. So much information. I never knew about these two. It was probably the most interesting topic I've gotten to research so far and to piece together. It's very, very interesting. Reading through their journal entries was incredible, as I never knew how detailed these accounts became. Now, though, we're going to get rolling into our final takeaways and get to wrapping up this lengthy, information-packed episode. Well, everyone, that wraps up today's deep dive into the epic saga of the Lewis and Clark expedition. We've charted the monumental journey of Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, and their Corps of Discovery as they braved the unknown to map the vast American West. From the Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean and back, they encountered uncharted wilderness, made groundbreaking scientific discoveries, and forged relationships with indigenous peoples, all while reshaping the course of American history. If you found this journey as inspiring and fascinating as I did, let's keep the adventure alive. Be sure to follow Beneath the Shadows on Instagram and TikTok for more content and behind-the-scenes glimpses. And don't forget to check out the Patreon page for bonus episodes and exclusive content that dives deeper, even deeper, into stories like this one. New episodes every other week on Patreon. Those episodes are about 20 to 30 minutes long and really kind of tackle some details that aren't covered or some shorter episodes that just don't work for these main parts of the show, these main episodes of the show. So definitely go and check that out. There's a couple of free ones. They will be free until the end of the year. And after that, the episodes coming out in 2025 will only be $3 a month. $3 a month for 2 episodes every other week. You get something new. You learn something new. I would love the support because your support helps keep these incredible tales coming. So thank you for that. Next week now, we delve into an appetite unlike any other. Actually, a handful of insatiable appetites. Next week, we take the incredible tale of Terrar, Charles Damery, and other terrific appetites out of the shadows. We will look at their lives, their deaths, and their beyond miraculous stomachs. So stop back next week here on Beneath the Shadows. Also, if you haven't had the chance, please take the time to rate and review the show. Rating helps so much. Reviews help so much. It helps boost the show up the charts. Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Spotify, whatever you're listening on, please go give the show 5 stars. Tell me something you love about it. Tell me something you love about yourself. Or at this time of year, tell me something you're thankful for. Or what you want for Christmas even. Tell me something. If you hate the show, give it 5 stars and tell me everything you fucking hate about it. Other than that, though, thank you for exploring this extraordinary chapter of history with me today. Whether you're a seasoned listener or this is your first trek into the shadows, I truly appreciate you being here. Keep seeking the stories that help shape our world and stay curious about the mysteries just waiting to be uncovered. Until next time, peace out, my shadow people.
Wow, wow, wow.